I backed out of the house we were buying 3 weeks before closing. The realtor stared at the release form, then at me. Are you sure? You could lose the deposit. The one both our families helped wire in. I signed anyway. My fiancé was still in Lake Tahoe, 6 Januaries running, with the ex I now knew both families had quietly protected. The realtor's pen stopped moving. She had no idea I had already found the sneakers, the note, and the ledger. I found the shoes 21 days before I was supposed to sign for the house. White canvas sneakers, size 6, tucked behind my fiancé's hiking boots like they had every right to be there. The walk-in closet smelled like cedar and dry cleaning bags. I had been kneeling on the carpet for an hour, sorting 6 years of life into 2 boxes labeled Keep and Donate. Moving into a house you are buying with someone requires faith, the belief that your shared future outweighs the past you are packing away. I believed that. I had believed it since Corbin proposed on the rim trail in Sedona 2 years earlier, and I had not stopped believing it until I pulled those sneakers off the shelf. They were light, clean, barely worn. I turned one over, a scuff on the left heel, the kind you get walking on flagstone. I wear a size 8. I have worn a size 8 since I was 16 years old. These were not my shoes. Something shifted in my chest, the way a locked drawer shifts when you pull it wrong, not open, but no longer fully closed. I sat back on my heels and held the sneakers in my lap like a scale trying to find its balance. That was when I found the note. A yellow sticky note, folded once, tucked inside the left shoe, the way you might hide a receipt you did not want found. The handwriting was neat, slanted right, written with the confidence of someone who assumed no one else would read it. Save these for next year's trip. Don't forget me again. S. I read it 3 times. The first time, I absorbed the words. The second, the tone, casual, entitled, familiar. The third time, I absorbed the word that mattered. Again, not, don't forget me. Don't forget me again. As if there had been a first forgetting, a correction, and then another forgetting requiring this hidden reminder in my fiancé's closet. The note was not a confession. It was a continuation. I folded it along its original crease and slid it into my robe pocket. I put the sneakers back exactly where I had found them, angled behind Corbin's boots at the same degree. I closed the closet door and stood in the hallway listening to his voice on a work call. Steady, professional, explaining a timeline to someone who needed reassurance. How was good at timelines. He was good at making people feel like everything was on track. I went to bed beside him that night and did not say a word. The next morning, I set the sneakers on the kitchen counter while he poured coffee. The granite was cold under the canvas, and the shoes looked smaller under the overhead light. Ordinary, almost innocent. Whose are these? I kept my voice level. I had practiced the sentence in the bathroom mirror while brushing my teeth. Corbin Mercer was 33, the kind of man people called when things went sideways, but never when they needed someone to sit in silence and listen. He glanced at the shoes the way you glance at a parking ticket. Brief, dismissive, already calculating the cost of acknowledgement. Fiancé left those after she came over with everyone a few months back. You were visiting your parents. He did not touch them. He did not pick them up or wonder why I had placed them between us like evidence I had not yet named. Have you ever watched someone lie to you while pouring your coffee and felt the kitchen shrink until you could hear your own heartbeat against the cabinets? And the note inside? His jaw tightened. Half a second, maybe less. The kind of micro-expression you catch only if you are already watching for it. I was watching. What note? But his hand had already stopped moving. He said it the way people say, "What noise?" when they heard the noise before you did. Not confusion, calibration. He was measuring how much I knew by the shape of my question, and I let him measure, because I wanted to see what his answer would cost him. It cost him nothing. He picked up his laptop, kissed my forehead on the way out, and said he would be home late because of a client meeting in Mesa. The door closed. The coffee maker beeped. The kitchen returned to its normal size. I stood at the counter holding the mug he had poured for me. The right amount of cream, no sugar, the way I had taken it for 6 years. He always got the coffee right. He always got the small things right. It was the large things he treated like someone else's responsibility. I slid the note from my robe pocket and read it one more time. Save these for next year's trip. Don't forget me again. The word that kept circling was not trip. It was again. As if there had been a last time, and a time before that, and a time before that. A chain of years I had never been invited into. I placed the note inside my work bag and zipped the pocket shut. 21 days until closing. I had questions, and for the first time in 6 years, I was not going to ask Corbin for the answers. I spent 6 years turning a man's indifference into a character trait and calling it love. That evening, with the note zipped inside my bag and the apartment quiet around me, I sat on the couch and did something I had never allowed myself to do. I looked backward, not at the good moments or the bad ones, at the pattern between them. Corbin drove 40 minutes across Scottsdale the night my father had a heart scare. He sat beside me in the emergency room at 2 a.m, his hand on my back while the monitors beeped and Eugene's breathing stabilized behind the curtain. He replaced my brake pads on a Saturday before I even noticed the dashboard warning light. When I had a fever that wouldn't break, he carried me to urgent care and stayed until sunrise, reading magazines in a plastic chair because he said he didn't want me waking up alone. A man who does that doesn't hide things. That was the logic I lived inside for 6 years. But there was the other side, the side I cataloged with labels instead of questions. He forgot my 30th birthday. Not the date itself, but the dinner reservation I had mentioned 3 times. When I brought it up afterward, he said birthdays stressed him out, and I filed it under Corbin doesn't do birthdays, and moved on. He refused every trip I suggested, the coast, the mountains, a long weekend in Santa Fe, but never explained why, and I filed that under Corbin isn't spontaneous. When I asked him to retake a photo of me at a friend's wedding because the first one was blurry, he set my phone down and said, "It's fine. You look fine." I filed that under Corbin isn't sentimental. Let me be clear about something. Corbin was not a bad man. That is what made him so dangerous to love. The labels became the relationship. Every time something felt wrong, I translated it into a quirk and placed it on a shelf beside all the urgent care visits and the brake pads and the 40-minute drives. The good was real. I need you to understand that. The good was never fake. It was just the part of the building I was allowed to see. That's just Corbin. I must have said it 100 times. To my friends, to my mother, eventually to myself. It was the sentence I used to close every door I should have opened. And standing in that kitchen that morning, watching him deny the note with a jaw that knew exactly what was written on it, I realized the labels had never been descriptions. They had been permissions. I had given him permission to disappoint me by calling each disappointment a feature instead of a flaw. I poured myself a glass of water and opened the shared laptop. The apartment was dark except for the screen's blue-white glow. Corbin was at the gym. Tuesday routine. Always 90 minutes, always back by 9. I had time. I started with the emails. I was not looking for anything specific. I told myself I was checking old receipts, confirming dates, building a timeline that might explain the shoes. His inbox was organized the way his closet was organized. Neat, categorized, everything in its labeled place. I searched for Sedona. The results loaded in a column. Hotel confirmations, 1 per year, going back to the 1st January after we started dating. His company hosted a retreat every year at a resort outside Sedona. I knew that. He left on a Wednesday, the event ended Friday, and he came home Sunday. I had never questioned the extra days. He said he liked to decompress. I filed it under Corbin needs alone time. When does a pattern stop being coincidence and start being architecture? 6 years. 6 Januaries. Every single one showed a Friday checkout from the company block and a separate reservation. Different resort. Personal card. Extending through Sunday morning. The second reservations were always for two. My stomach tightened. The water I had poured sat untouched, warming beside the laptop. I could hear the refrigerator humming and the neighbor's television through the wall. Sounds I had never noticed before, because I had never sat in this apartment listening this hard. I scrolled past the hotel confirmations and into his document folders. Mortgage docs, wedding plan, and between them, a folder I had never opened. Family fund. The folder was not locked. It was not buried. It had been sitting there for years, the way a secret sits in plain sight when nobody expects you to look. I had seen that folder name a dozen times while searching for our lease agreement or the wedding vendor spreadsheet. I had assumed it was something related to his parents' finances, the kind of family bookkeeping that didn't concern me. I had never clicked it because I had been taught, slowly, gently, over 6 years, that certain folders belonged to Corbin's side of things. I clicked it open. Inside were bank statements, quarterly, going back years, with account holders listed at the top in small serif font. I recognized the names of Corbin's parents, Lorraine and Hugh Mercer. Beneath them was a second pair of names I had only ever connected to one person. Sauers's parents, the same initial, the same surname, the same woman whose shoes were still sitting on my kitchen counter. The laptop fan hummed. The screen held still. And the folder that had been sitting between our mortgage and our wedding for 6 years finally opened into something I could not file under a label and forget. I did not sleep that night. I sat in the glow of the laptop and opened every folder on that shared drive like a woman pulling threads from a sweater she had been wearing for 6 years. The fund statements with their paired surnames were still on the screen, but I scrolled past them. Something else had caught my eye in the directory. A set of folders I had never noticed, filed below the financial documents in a row so tidy it looked automated. 6 folders. Sedona 2020, Sedona 2021, all the way through Sedona 2025. I opened the oldest one first. Sauerse Prescott filled the frame. She was sitting on a red rock ledge with her knees pulled up, laughing at something outside the camera's reach. The light was coming from the left, low, golden, late afternoon, and whoever was behind the lens had waited for it. The composition was deliberate. Her chin was tilted just enough to catch the warmth. The background was sharp where it needed to be and soft where it didn't. This was not a snapshot. This was patience. I opened the next folder. Same overlook, different year. Sauerse in a denim jacket with her hair loose, the canyon behind her layered in reds and oranges. Then the next, Sauerse in front of a lodge fireplace, her reflection doubled in the window glass. Then a cafe, a hiking trail, a lake. Every image was composed the way a person composes a photograph when they care about the subject more than the moment. I need you to understand what hurt most. It was not that he took pictures of her. It was that every single one was composed with a patience he told me he did not possess. It's fine. You look fine. That is what Corbin said when I asked him to retake a blurry shot of me at a friend's wedding. He set my phone down like the request itself was unreasonable. I filed it under a label and moved on. But here, on this screen, were 6 years of evidence that he knew exactly how to frame a face in good light. He knew how to crouch low to catch a lake behind someone's shoulders. He knew how to wait for golden hour. He had the skill. He had always had it. He just never used it for me. I scrolled through the folders one by one, watching Sauerse age in small increments. A different haircut, a new pair of sunglasses, a tan that deepened each January. She was beautiful in all of them, but it was not her beauty that gutted me. It was the care. The angle of each shot told me Corbin had moved, adjusted, tried again. He retook photos of her. He retook them until the light was right. The apartment was silent, except for the laptop fan and the distant sound of a car alarm resetting itself somewhere on the street below. My coffee sat untouched beside the keyboard, cold and forgotten. The cedar smell from the closet I had cleaned the week before drifted in through the hallway, like a reminder of what had started all of this. I closed the photo folders and went back to the fund statements. The quarterly reports were formatted identically. Account number at the top, 4 names beneath it, then columns of transactions sorted by date. I recognized Lorraine and Hugh Mercer. Below them, 2 names I now understood belonged to Saoirse's parents. 4 holders, 2 families, 1 account. Looking at those statements was like finding the blueprint under a house you thought you had built together, and realizing someone else poured the foundation. I did not understand trust law. I did not know what a joint family investment vehicle meant in practice. But I could read a spreadsheet. The deposits were quarterly. The disbursements were annual. Every January, a lump sum transferred out of the fund and into a secondary account I could not trace from these documents alone. Every January. The same month, Corbin packed a bag for his company retreat and came home 2 days after it ended. 6 Januaries. 6 disbursements. 6 folders of photographs. The numbers matched the pictures the way a key matches a lock. I leaned back in the desk chair and pressed my palms against my eyes. The trackpad was warm from hours of scrolling. My back ached. The clock on the laptop read 2:47 a.m., and Corbin was asleep in our bed, 12 feet away, breathing the slow, unbothered rhythm of a man who had never expected anyone to open the folders sitting in plain view on a shared computer. There was one more thing. One column I had not yet traced. In the January disbursement records, a recurring line item was labeled Property Escrow Contribution. It appeared every year for the past 3 years, growing slightly each time. The most recent amount, the one dated this past January, was a number I had seen before. Not approximately, exactly. It matched a figure on our mortgage paperwork, the document I had signed 8 weeks ago when we put the down payment into escrow for the house. I closed the laptop at 3 in the morning and sat in the dark. The photos had shown me who Corbin chose to see. The statements were beginning to show me who paid for it. And now, a single line on a spreadsheet was suggesting that the house I was about to buy, the house I believed we were building together, had roots in an account I was never supposed to find. How do you ask someone whether your entire engagement is built on a financial arrangement you were never invited to understand? I drove to work the next morning with the escrow figure circling my head like a number on a receipt you know is wrong, but cannot yet prove. I had slept 2 hours. The spreadsheet columns floated behind my eyelids every time I blinked, and the question I kept arriving at was not whether the fund was real, but whether I was the kind of woman who manufactured a crisis out of paperwork she did not fully understand. By noon, I could not sit with it alone any longer. Tamara Greer was 36, a UX research lead who sat 2 desks from mine and spoke in short sentences, because she had learned the hard way that long explanations gave people time to talk you out of the truth. We had been work friends for 3 years. Lunch twice a week, the occasional drink, the kind of closeness that stays professional until someone needs it not to be. I set the printed fund statement on the cafe table between our salads. Am I making this into something it isn't? Tamara picked up the page. Her eyes moved across the names at the top. Mercer, Prescott, and her hands went still, the way a person's hands go still when they recognize a shape they have seen before. Where did you find this? Shared laptop, a folder labeled Family Fund. She set the page down and looked at me with an expression I had never seen from her. Not pity, recognition. If there's a shared account you weren't consulted about, you're not overthinking, she said. You're reading it correctly. I want to tell you something about doubt. It is the most expensive emotion a woman in my position can afford, because every day you spend doubting yourself is a day they spend building the arrangement tighter around your name. Tamara did not offer comfort. She offered coordinates. She told me about her first marriage, a relationship I had never known about. His name was David. His family maintained a joint trust with the parents of a woman he had dated in college. The trust funded shared vacations and eventually a down payment on a house Tamara believed was theirs alone. She discovered it 14 months in when a tax document arrived with an unfamiliar name listed as a beneficiary on the property. "I stayed 18 months after I found it," she said. Her voice dropped half a register. "Don't be me. The longer you wait, the more money they bury under your name." She told me the rest the way people describe car accidents. Short sentences, no adjectives, as if decorating the truth might make it collapse. David's family called it tradition. His mother said it was how they had always managed assets. The college girlfriend attended holidays. Tamara was expected to be grateful for the stability, the life she had been given without being asked if she wanted it on those terms. "I left with a suitcase and a lawyer's number," she said. "The lawyer cost me $11,000. Leaving without one would have cost me everything." The cafe noise wrapped around us. Forks against plates, the espresso machine, a couple laughing by the window. And inside that noise, our conversation felt like a room with its own walls. I picked up my water glass, and the condensation ran cold over my fingers. "The escrow column," I said. "There's a line item on the fund statements labeled Property Escrow Contribution. The January amount matches a number on our mortgage paperwork." Tamara closed her eyes for 1 second. When she opened them, her jaw was set. "Then your down payment didn't come from where you think it did," she said. "And if it's routed through a family trust with co-holders you didn't know about, you may not fully own what you think you're buying." When someone who has already walked through your exact fire tells you to run, do you ask for more proof, or do you start moving? I started moving. Tamara reached into her bag and pulled out a business card. The edges were soft from years inside a wallet, the kind of wear that comes from being carried not as a reminder, but as a precaution. The card belonged to a real estate attorney who specialized in untangling shared family trusts. "I kept this because I always thought someone else would need it someday," she said. She slid it across the table and tapped the name once. "Call her before you talk to Corbin again. Get the escrow traced, and whatever you do, do not let him know you've seen that column." I picked up the card. The name was embossed in navy ink, slightly raised under my thumb. I put it in the same pocket of my work bag where the sticky note had been sitting for a week. 2 small pieces of paper that together weighed more than anything else I carried. Outside, the Scottsdale sun hit the pavement and the heat rose in waves. I had a meeting at 2. I had an attorney to call by 5. And I had a fiancé who did not yet know that the woman he came home to every night had stopped believing the story he had built around her. I did the opposite of what Tamara told me. I went home that evening and asked Corbin directly, because I needed to hear him lie to my face before I could believe it was real. The attorney's card sat in my work bag beside the sticky note. 2 pieces of evidence and 1 phone number I had not yet dialed. But before I called a stranger to explain my life, I wanted to give the man I had loved for 6 years one chance to explain it himself. Dinner was pasta with garlic bread. His recipe, the one he made on nights when neither of us wanted to think about food. I waited until he was halfway through his plate. "What's the family fund folder on the laptop?" I kept my voice level, the way you keep a fishing line slack before you set the hook. Corbin's fork paused for 1 second. Not long enough for someone who was not watching, but I had been watching for days now, and 1 second was a paragraph. "It's just an old family savings thing," he said. He resumed eating. "Grandpa Mercer set it up years ago. Grown-up family stuff. You don't need to worry about it." Grown-up family stuff. As though I were a child asking about the electricity bill. As though a 31-year-old woman about to co-sign a mortgage did not have standing to understand where the money originated. "Then why is the Prescott name on the account?" His jaw tightened. The same half-second compression I had seen when I asked about the shoes. The same controlled release afterward. The same manufactured ease returning to his face like a screensaver, clicking on after a moment of stillness. "The families have invested together since before either of us was born," he said. "It's how old Arizona money works. Their parents were business partners in the 80s. It's not interesting. There is a specific kind of silence a man produces when he has decided your question is not worth a real answer. I had been accepting that silence as personality for 6 years, filing it under labels, converting it into quirks, telling myself that Corbin's refusal to elaborate was just how he was built. But sitting across the table from him now, watching him steer the conversation toward closing paperwork with the ease of a man changing lanes on a highway, I understood the silence was not a trait. It was a tool. He asked if I had called the title company about the inspection report. I said I would handle it tomorrow. He nodded, cleared his plate, and went to the living room to watch the Diamondbacks game. The kitchen smelled like garlic and cooling bread, and I sat alone at the table long enough to hear the first pitch. He had not asked me why I was looking at the folder. That was the part that confirmed it. A man with nothing to hide asks why you are looking. A man with something to protect asks you to stop. That Saturday, Corbin left for golf at 7. By 7:15, I was in the home office with the door closed. I pulled the mortgage paperwork from the filing cabinet and spread it across the floor. The purchase agreement, the escrow instructions, the lender disclosures, the wire transfer confirmation. Mortgage paperwork spread across the floor like a crime scene. Except in this crime, I had signed every document myself. The wire transfer confirmation was a single page. I had glanced at it once during the signing appointment and never looked again, because Corbin told me the down payment had been wired from his family's savings as an engagement gift. I believed him. I had no reason not to. I read it now the way Tamara had taught me to read things. Not for what was written, but for what was named. The originating account was not a personal savings account. The wire had been sent from an entity, Prescott Mercer Holdings, LLC. I read the name 3 times. Then I opened the laptop and navigated to the Sedona photo folders. I scrolled through the 2024 set, the most recent January trip, past the overlook shots and the fireplace images, past Saoirse laughing into wind, until I found the one I was looking for. A wide shot of the lodge lobby. Saoirse stood near the reception desk, her hiking jacket half-zipped, and behind her left shoulder hung a corporate sponsor banner printed in forest green and white. Prescott Mercer Holdings, LLC, the same name. On the wire transfer that funded our home. On the banner behind the woman whose shoes were still in my closet. I set the laptop on the floor beside the mortgage documents and looked at both screens side by side. The wire transfer on the left, the photo on the right. The entity that was paying for our future home was the same entity that had sponsored 6 years of Corbin's weekends with Saoirse. The down payment had not come from his family's savings. It had not been an engagement gift from generous parents. It had come from a jointly held corporate entity that bore both their family names, funded their annual retreats, and operated in a space I had never been allowed to see. I sat on that cold office floor, surrounded by paper, and felt something shift. Not the locked drawer feeling from the closet, not the slow dread of the late-night laptop search. This was different. This was the floor tilting under a house I had been told was mine. Corbin would be home by noon. I had the attorney's card. I had the wire transfer. And I had exactly the amount of proof I needed to stop asking my fiancé for answers and start asking someone whose job it was to find them. Monday morning, I did something I had never done in 6 years with Corbin. I Googled his family like a stranger. The wire transfer and the retreat banner were still side by side in my mind. 2 halves of an equation I could no longer pretend did not add up. I waited until lunch, closed my office door, and opened the Arizona Corporation Commission database on my monitor. Prescott Mercer Holdings, LLC returned a single result. Registered 11 years ago, 5 years before I met Corbin. 4 named members, Lorraine Mercer, Hugh Mercer, and 2 people with the surname Prescott. Status, active, in good standing. Annual reports filed every year, most recently in January. The entity had been breathing quietly in the background of my entire relationship, filing paperwork and making transfers while I planned a wedding and saved for a house I thought was ours. The registered address stopped me. It was Lorraine's house. The Mesa address I had driven to 100 times for Sunday dinners, where she poured me coffee in a blue ceramic mug and told me Fiancé was family. The trust was literally headquartered in the kitchen where I sat and smiled, and never once thought to ask what was happening in the rooms I was not invited into. 11 years that entity had been standing, like a wall built before I arrived, designed to hold a shape I was never supposed to see from the inside. I printed the registration page, folded it into my bag beside the attorney's card and the sticky note, and went back to work. 3 pieces of paper now, a growing file of things I could not unknow. 2 days later, I sat in a leather chair across from Nadine Holt. She was a real estate attorney in her late 40s with reading glasses perpetually pushed to the top of her head and a voice that made legal deadlines sound like weather forecasts, inevitable and not up for debate. Tamara had kept her card for 4 years. I understood why within the first 5 minutes. I set the mortgage documents on her desk alongside the LLC registration printout. She read silently for several minutes, turning pages with the practiced speed of someone who had seen this kind of architecture before. "Walk me through the down payment," she said without looking up. I told her what I knew. The total escrow deposit was split between 2 sources, my personal savings and a wire transfer from the LLC. I had believed the wire was a gift from Corbin's parents. The paperwork told a different story. I want you to sit with that number for a moment. $72,000. Every bonus I had saved for 4 years. Every raise I chose not to spend. Every time I picked the cheaper option because we were building something together. That money was mine. Earned, taxed, deposited 1 paycheck at a time into an account with only my name on it. And now it sat in an escrow pool beside funds from an entity I had discovered by accident on a Saturday morning. Nadine set the documents down and removed her glasses from the top of her head, the first time she had touched them since I walked in. "Here's the problem," she said. "Right now, your $72,000 is in escrow as a separate contribution. It's identifiable. It's yours. But once closing happens, both sources merge into the mortgage. Your money becomes part of a loan, co-backed by this entity. Separating it after that point will cost you more than the money itself." "How long do I have?" She checked the closing date circled on the purchase contract. Her pen tapped it once. 3 weeks. After that, your contribution belongs to the structure. 3 weeks. That was the distance between keeping my money and losing it inside an arrangement built by 2 families who never asked my name. "Can I withdraw without my fiancé's signature? For your personal contribution, yes. Your funds were deposited from a sole account. I can file a withdrawal request with the escrow company independently." She paused. "For the shared portions, the joint savings you and your fiancé contributed together, that requires both signatures. That gets complicated." The air conditioning hummed. The office smelled like leather and the faint coffee drifting from the lobby. I could hear my own breathing in the quiet that followed, and I realized I was gripping the armrest hard enough to feel the stitching under my fingernails. "There's one more thing you need to understand," Nadine said. She slid the paperwork across her desk and placed a pen on top of it. "The moment I file the withdrawal request, anyone connected to the escrow account gets notified. Your fiancé, his parents, the Prescotts, the lender. Everyone involved in this transaction will know you are pulling your money out." I stared at the pen. It was silver, heavier than it looked. "So the second I move, everyone who built this structure will know you found it," she said. "That's the trade. You get your money back, but you lose the element of surprise. And in my experience, families who build entities like this do not respond well to surprise." I picked up the pen. I did not sign anything. I held it in my hand and felt its weight and thought about Corbin pouring my coffee, about Lorraine's blue mug, about a banner in a lodge lobby, and a pair of white sneakers tucked behind hiking boots. 3 weeks. And the clock had already started. Tamara opened her front door, looked at the folder under my arm, and said, "You found the money trail, didn't you?" Not a question. I had driven there with the attorney's deadline ringing in my ears, and a decision I had not yet made sitting heavy in my chest. 3 weeks before closing. Notification the moment I filed. I needed a strategy, not just a timeline. Tamara's apartment was sparse. Clean counters, few personal items, the kind of space kept by a woman who had learned to travel light. She brewed chamomile tea without asking, set 2 mugs on the kitchen table, and sat across from me with her hands folded. "Tell me everything," she said. I laid it out. The LLC registration, the Mesa address, the escrow wire, the attorney's warning. Tamara listened without interrupting, nodding at intervals the way someone nods when they are not hearing news but hearing confirmation. When I finished, she told me the rest of her story. The full version, not the cafe summary. Her first husband's family had run a joint trust with the parents of a woman he dated in college. The trust funded vacations, a car lease, and eventually a down payment on a house. Tamara believed she and David were buying a loan. She discovered the arrangement 14 months into her marriage when a tax form arrived listing names she had never heard. She spent the next 4 months documenting everything: screenshots, bank statements, property records, before filing for divorce. "The trust wasn't a secret they were keeping from me," she said. Her voice had dropped into that flat register I recognized from our cafe lunch. The voice of someone recounting facts she had rehearsed until the edges wore smooth. It was a structure they never thought I needed to know about. That's worse, because it means you were never part of the architecture. I need you to hear what she said next, because it is the sentence that changed how I understood my entire relationship. The system was designed before I entered it, and would have continued whether I noticed or not. I was not a victim of a plot. I was a variable in a spreadsheet, a row that could be replaced without restructuring the formula. "I made one mistake," Tamara said. She wrapped both hands around her mug and looked at me over the rim. "I confronted him before I had copies of everything. He changed the passwords that night. Every shared account, every login, every document folder. By morning, I was locked out of my own financial life. I spent $11,000 on a lawyer rebuilding what I could have saved for free with a flash drive and 2 hours of patience." She let that sit. The AC hummed. The tea cooled. "Don't do what I did." How many women have sat at a kitchen table like this one, holding evidence they wished they had never found, being taught survival skills by the woman who came before them? Tamara stood and opened a drawer beside the refrigerator. She pulled out a notebook. Leather cover, soft at the edges from years of being carried and never used. She set it on the table between us. "I kept this for 4 years because I knew someday someone would sit at this table and need it." I opened it. The first page was a list, handwritten in black ink, numbered 1 through 14. Each item was a step: which accounts to screenshot first, which statements to request by mail before making any digital moves, how to create a paper trail that would hold up if the other party destroyed records. The sequence was precise, methodical, ordered the way an engineer orders a demolition plan. What to photograph before you pull the first wall. Page after page. Bank account protocols. How to request certified statements from a financial institution without triggering a joint holder notification. Which documents to photograph with a timestamp and which to request as certified copies. How to separate a joint cell phone plan without alerting the primary account holder. Where to store physical copies so they could not be confiscated during a confrontation. That notebook was 4 years old, its pages soft from being carried and never opened, like a fire extinguisher someone keeps behind glass, hoping the next person will need it less. "This is everything I learned too late," Tamara said. "Use it in order, don't skip steps, and whatever you do, do not let him see you making copies until you have every document you need." I turned to the last page. There, in red ink, circled twice, Tamara had written a single line that stopped me cold. "Check the Sunday dinners." I looked up. "What does that mean?" Tamara's expression did not change. "It means the fund doesn't just pay for trips. In my case, The weekly family dinners were where they made the real decisions: who was in, who was out, and how much everyone's silence was worth. The money moves in accounts, but the power moves at the table. I closed the notebook and held it in my lap. The leather was warm from the drawer and smooth under my palms. The weight of someone else's survival condensed into 60 pages of handwritten instructions. Sunday dinner at Lorraine's house was in 5 days. I had been going every week for 6 years, eating roast chicken and pretending the way Saoirse was treated at that table was just family warmth. Now I had a notebook, a deadline, and a new pair of eyes. I was going to sit at that table one more time, but this time I was going to watch. Lorraine Mercer's kitchen smelled like roasted garlic and someone else's importance. I just didn't have the vocabulary for it until that Sunday. I walked into her house in Mesa with Tamara's red ink warning still fresh in my mind. Check the Sunday dinners. I had been checking nothing for 6 years. Now I was going to sit at that table and watch the way I should have been watching all along. Lorraine was 62, a retired dental office administrator who kept her kitchen organized the way she kept her loyalties, everything in its original place and no room for rearrangement. She greeted me at the door with a hug and a glass of iced tea and told me dinner would be ready in 20 minutes. The table was set for 3. There was a 4th chair, Saoirse's usual seat, pulled slightly out from the table as if someone had been sitting in it recently and hadn't pushed it back. Corbin was already in the living room with his phone. Lorraine and I stood in the kitchen while she checked the roast, and that was when she started talking about the wedding. Saoirse picked the best favors from that list I sent, she said, pulling a baking sheet from the oven. Honestly, she knows your taste better than anyone. She narrowed it down to 3 options before I even finished looking. She said it like she was paying me a compliment by replacing me. I smiled. I held the glass of iced tea and I smiled, because that is what I had been trained to do in this kitchen. Smile and nod and be grateful that the family machine was running smoothly, even when I could see my own name being filed further and further from the center of it. Then Lorraine pulled out her phone. Did you see the necklace he had made for her birthday? She swiped to a photo and turned screen toward me. A custom gold pendant on a velvet display. Delicate, intentional, the kind of piece that required a conversation with a jeweler and a lead time of weeks. Ordered it 2 months ahead. That boy can plan when he wants to. She laughed. Corbin kept eating his bread in the doorway and did not look up. I want you to hold 2 facts side by side. He ordered a custom necklace for Saoirse's birthday 2 months early, selected the design, chose the gold weight, picked up the finished piece, and he forgot my birthday entirely. Came home after 10. Promised to make it up on a weekend he spent playing golf instead. I filed it under a label and moved on. But the necklace on Lorraine's phone was not a label. It was a receipt for care he had always been capable of. Dinner was roast chicken with rosemary potatoes. Lorraine served Corbin first, then me, rosemary potatoes. Lorraine served Corbin first, then me, and the food was good, but I could barely taste it past the metallic edge of anger I was holding behind my teeth. The conversation moved to the house. The closing timeline, the inspection report, the paint colors for the guest room. Lorraine suggested asking Saoirse for design input. If you get stuck on anything for the wedding, just ask her, Lorraine said. She's family. The table went quiet for exactly 1 second. Then everyone kept chewing. How many Sundays had Saoirse sat in that chair while I stayed home believing I was respecting Lorraine's space? Space that was never empty? I excused myself to use the bathroom and walked through the hallway slowly. The house I had visited 100 times looked different now. There were small things I had never registered. A mug in the cabinet with an S painted on the handle. A specific salad dressing in the refrigerator door that I had never seen anyone in this family eat. A throw blanket folded on the couch in a pattern that matched nothing else in the room. Saoirse knew which cabinet held Lorraine's favorite mug. She knew which dressing Lorraine preferred and how long to microwave the bread. She had been here regularly, not as a guest, but as a fixture. I had been told Lorraine liked her space. That Sunday dinners were a small affair. Just Lorraine, Corbin, and me. But the evidence of a fourth presence was everywhere, embedded in the kitchen like sediment. Saoirse had not just been invited to this table. She had helped set it. Lorraine said she's family, the way you describe wallpaper. Something so permanent you forget it was a choice. I returned to the table and finished my plate. I complimented the chicken. I helped clear the dishes. I did everything I had always done because I was not ready to stop performing yet. Not until every document in Tamara's notebook was copied, filed, and stored somewhere Corbin could never reach. On the drive home, Corbin asked if I was quiet because of the food. No, I said, just tired. He turned up the radio. I stared at the road and thought about the necklace photo still glowing on Lorraine's phone. Custom gold, ordered 2 months ahead, for a woman whose birthday he remembered without prompting. My own birthday had been 11 months ago. He still hadn't made it up. He never would. And sitting in the passenger seat of his car, watching the Mesa streetlights slide past the window, I understood with a clarity that felt like cold water that I had never been the primary woman in that household. I had been the one they let attend. I was at the bank by 8:15 on Monday morning, the first appointment of the day, before Corbin's coffee was even cold. The Sunday dinner had settled into me overnight, like a stone in still water. By dawn, I was not angry anymore. I was precise. The bank lobby was quiet and smelled like paper and carpet cleaner. I sat across from a teller with Nadine's instructions in my jacket pocket and Tamara's notebook sequence memorized. Step 1. Redirect personal deposits before touching anything shared. The teller was a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a beaded chain. She pulled up the account and walked me through the forms. You're redirecting all personal deposits to a new individual account? She asked. Are you sure you don't want to discuss this with the other account holder first? Her voice was gentle. The voice of someone who had asked that question before and watched women hesitate. I picked up the pen. 3 forms. 4 minutes. That is how long it takes to begin separating yourself from a future someone else built around you. I signed each one without looking up, and the pen was steady. Steadier than it had been in Nadine's office. Steadier than it had been in 6 years of signing things Corbin placed in front of me with a summary instead of an explanation. It felt like breathing after holding my head underwater. Not dramatic, just air. The teller processed the forms and handed me a confirmation receipt. I sat in the parking lot for 2 minutes with the receipt on my lap. My deposits would now route to an account with only my name. Such a small act. It should not have felt like revolution. But for 6 years, every dollar I earned had flowed into a shared pool I never questioned. And now I had redirected a river with 3 signatures and a pen that did not shake. I drove to work. I taught my classes. And I waited. The notification arrived on Corbin's phone 3 days later. I knew because of the way he set his fork down at dinner. The same deliberate pause he used when measuring his next sentence. The apartment smelled like pasta sauce cooling on the stove, and the bank alert still glowed on his phone screen. I got a notification from the bank, he said. His voice was level. Did you change something on the account? Watching Corbin try to read me was like watching a locksmith realize someone has changed the tumblers while he was out. He had the old keys in his hand and no idea when they stopped working. Just reorganizing some things for the move, I said. I kept eating. He didn't. Reorganizing how? Direct deposits, simpler to have mine in a separate account for the transition. It was a reasonable explanation. I had rehearsed it the way I once rehearsed asking about the shoes. He watched me chew. I could see him running calculations behind his eyes, the expression he wore when a spreadsheet didn't balance. Is there something you're not telling me? He asked. I set my fork down and looked at him across the table where I had asked about the fund and been told it was grown-up family business, where I had accepted every deflection because questioning him felt like questioning the foundation itself. I think that question should be mine, I said. The apartment went quiet. Not comfortable quiet. The loaded quiet of two people who both know something and are deciding how much to show. Corbin opened his mouth, closed it. It's just financial reorganization, I said. Grown-up stuff. You don't need to worry about it. He heard his own words come back to him and went completely still, the way a man goes still when he hears a door lock from the wrong side. His eyes narrowed, not in anger, in recognition. He knew that phrase. He had invented it, and hearing it from my mouth, delivered with the same casual dismissal he had perfected over 6 years, he understood for the first time what it felt like to be on the receiving end of a closed door dressed up as an answer. I did not ask again. I cleared the dishes. He stayed at the table. I could feel him watching me from the kitchen doorway while I rinsed the plates, and the weight of his attention had a different texture now. Less confident, more searching. He was trying to figure out when I had changed, and I could tell from the way he kept glancing at his phone that he was not going to figure it out alone. That night, for the first time in 6 years, he checked his phone 3 times before coming to bed. He set it face down on the nightstand with the screen still lit, and in the half-second before the display dimmed, I saw the name on the last message he had been reading, Fiancé. I turned off my bedside lamp and lay in the dark, listening to him breathe. He was already texting her about me. The clock was running now, his and mine both. She rang the doorbell like a guest, but she moved through my apartment like someone who had memorized the floor plan. Corbin had texted Fiancé the night he learned about the bank change. 2 days later, on Saturday while he was running errands, she appeared at my door with a smile and a story about a forgotten jacket. Fiancé Prescott was 33, with the easy confidence of a woman who had never been asked to justify her presence in any room Corbin occupied. Before I could point her toward the closet, she was already walking there. She opened the hall closet door without asking which one it was, reached past the coats, and pulled the jacket from a hook near the back, the same hook I used for my raincoat. She did it without thinking, without scanning, without the half-second pause of a person in unfamiliar territory. Then she walked to the kitchen, opened the cabinet above the stove, and took down a glass. The correct cabinet, first try. She filled it from the filtered pitcher on the second shelf of the refrigerator and drank while leaning against the counter, the way someone leans against a surface they have leaned against many times before. Let me tell you what it feels like to watch another woman open the right cabinet in your kitchen on the first try. It feels like discovering you are the guest in your own home. She wandered into the living room and paused at the accent wall. The warm gray I had spent 2 weekends choosing from 60 paint samples. Oh, that turned out beautiful, she said. I told Corbin warm gray would be better than the cream. He agreed. She told Corbin warm gray would work. He agreed with her. Then he came home and told me, "Whatever you like, it's just paint." He gave me the illusion of choosing, while the choice had already been made by someone whose opinion he valued more. "You've been here a lot," I said. She smiled. "A few times. Corbin and I go way back. You know that. A few times does not produce that kind of fluency. A few times is a word people use when the real number would raise questions." Fiancé picked up her jacket and headed for the door. I stepped into the hallway ahead of her, my hand flat against the wall. "Do you know about Prescott Mercer Holdings?" Her hand stopped on the jacket zipper. The smile left her face in stages, like a light dimming through a series of switches. First the brightness, then the warmth, then the performance underneath both. "What about it?" "Its connection to the down payment, the wire transfer, the escrow." She stared at me, not with guilt, with confusion. "I thought he told you about the fund from the beginning," she said slowly. "It's been part of both our families for over a decade. My parents and the Mercers set it up before Corbin and I were out of college." She searched my face. Whatever she found there made her take a step back. "You really didn't know? If the woman whose opinions are on your walls and whose jacket is on your closet hook didn't even know you were being lied to, then who exactly built this cage?" "We didn't hide it from you," Fiancé said. Her voice was quieter now, stripped of ease. "They hid it from you." The hallway was silent. Her perfume hung in the air, Something floral I had smelled on Corbin's collar, and once explained away without asking a single question. She was not the architect. She was a beneficiary who had assumed transparency where there was none, and the shock on her face was too immediate to be performance. I did not see a rival standing in my doorway. I saw a woman given a role in a system she didn't fully design, the same way I had been given one. The difference was that her role came with access, and mine came with silence. Fiancé zipped her jacket and looked at me with an expression that sat between pity and respect. Two things I had never expected from her simultaneously. "Ask him about the January payments," she said. "All of them. He'll know what you mean." The elevator doors closed behind her. I stood in the doorway, breathing in the perfume she left behind and thinking about the word they. Not Fiancé. Not even Corbin alone. They, the families. The parents who filed paperwork and poured coffee and said, "She's family," while building a financial architecture that treated me as a tenant in a life I thought I co-owned. I closed the door. I locked it, and I picked up my phone to call the two people whose last name I still carried. The only family that had never hidden anything behind a cabinet I wasn't supposed to open. I had not called my parents in 3 weeks, the longest silence of my adult life, because I could not figure out how to say the words without making them real. Fiancé's parting line was still in my head. Ask him about the January payments. But I was done asking Corbin. I needed to talk to someone who would not measure their answer before giving it. I set my coffee on the balcony railing at dawn, opened my phone, and called the two people I should have called the night I found the shoes. My father, Eugene Ellsworth, 64, was a retired bridge inspector who had spent 30 years making sure the structures people drove over every day would not collapse beneath them. My mother, Ruth Ellsworth, 62, was a semi-retired school librarian who still alphabetized her spice rack and believed no problem survived being named out loud. Their faces filled the screen side by side. Eugene in his reading chair, Ruth at the kitchen table with her glasses pushed up into her hair. "Mom, Dad, I need to tell you something about Corbin in the house." My voice cracked on the word house, because it was never really mine. I told them everything, the shoes and the note, the photo folders, the LLC and the escrow wire, the attorney's 3-week deadline, Fiancé's visit, and the sentence that rearranged the blame. I talked for 20 minutes without stopping, and neither of them interrupted. When I finished, Ruth looked at me through the phone screen with the steady focus she used when a student came to the library counter with a problem they had been carrying too long. "You don't have to be strong alone," she said, once, quietly, without looking away. I cried for 12 minutes. I know because the call timer was in the corner of the screen, and it was the only thing I could focus on while my mother waited for me to breathe. Eugene was silent through all of it. When I wiped my face and looked at the screen again, his jaw was set in the way I had only seen once before. The time he told me about a bridge overpass in Flagstaff that passed inspection on paper but failed under load. His voice, when he finally spoke, was the flattest I had ever heard it, and I knew that meant he was furious. "I know a man who handles trust disputes," he said. "Worked with him on a state contract years ago. I'll call him today." He did not say Corbin's name. He did not need to. The balcony smelled like dry creosote and warming asphalt. My coffee had gone cold on the Inside the apartment, Corbin was still asleep, breathing the slow rhythm of a man whose structures were all still standing, as far as he knew. That afternoon, I drove to Nadine Holt's office for the second time. The filing took less time than I expected. Nadine had the withdrawal request prepared. 2 pages, flagged for signature, addressed to the escrow company and the mortgage lender. I signed both. She countersigned as my representative and fed them into the fax machine. Filing a withdrawal felt like pulling a pin. The form was in motion. The countdown had started, and there was no way to put it back without someone hearing the click. "The request is filed," Nadine said. She took off her reading glasses and set them on the desk. "But until the escrow company processes it, you are still on that contract. If closing happens before they confirm, your money stays in the structure." "How long does processing take?" 3 to 5 business days. sometimes longer if the other parties contest. 3 to 5 business days. That was the distance between keeping my savings and losing them inside an arrangement I was never invited to understand. And if Corbin finds out before then? Nadine paused. Then he or his family could accelerate the closing date. It's happened before. A motivated seller and a cooperative lender can move a closing forward by a week with the right paperwork. I sat with that. The leather chair creaked. The office smelled like recycled air and the faint coffee from the lobby. My signature was already on its way to a fax machine at the escrow company, and somewhere in that transmission was a notification that would eventually reach every person connected to the account. Corbin, Lorraine, the Prescotts. So I've started a clock I can't stop, I said. You started a clock that was already running, Nadine said. You just made it visible. I drove home with the filing receipt in my bag and a countdown in my chest. 3 to 5 business days. Corbin would be home in 2 hours. I parked in the garage and sat in the car with the engine off, the way I had sat in parking lots too many times in the past month, alone with information that was reshaping my life faster than I could plan for it. When I walked inside, the shared tablet on the kitchen counter was lit with a text notification synced from Corbin's phone. It was from Lorraine. She was organizing a gathering for the coming weekend. Both families, she wrote, to finalize a few things before the wedding. The Prescotts would be there. I set the tablet down and stared at the message. Both families in one room. The same families whose names sat on the LLC, whose money sat in the escrow, whose arrangement sat beneath every surface of my life, like rebar inside a wall, I had always assumed was solid. In 3 to 5 days, they would all know I had filed. But this weekend, they would all be in one room, and none of them would know I was already on my way out. There were 7 chairs at the table, and every one of them was full. I was the only person in the room who did not know why we were all there. I had walked into Lorraine's house expecting the usual Sunday arrangement: roast chicken, 3-place settings, small talk about the wedding. Instead, the dining room table had been extended with a leaf I had never seen used, and seated at the far end, like delegates at a summit, were 2 people I recognized from the fund statements. Saoirse's parents, the Prescotts. Saoirse sat between them and her mother, a glass of wine already half finished. Corbin stood when I entered and crossed the room to greet me with a kiss on the temple that felt like a stage direction. Lorraine was in the kitchen doorway wiping her hands on a towel, smiling the way she smiled when everything was going according to plan. A man in his 70s stood up from the far end. Corbin put his hand on my shoulder and turned me toward him. Uncle Dale, this is... His hand tightened. This is Saoirse. He stopped. The room stopped with him. Briar, sorry. He laughed, a short, mechanical sound. This is Briar. Nobody else laughed. Uncle Dale shook my hand. Saoirse studied her wine glass. Lorraine turned back to the kitchen. And Corbin's hand stayed on my shoulder for 2 seconds too long, as if pressing down could undo what had already escaped. He said her name first. I need you to sit with that. Not the correction. Not the embarrassed laugh. The fact that when his hand was on my shoulder, and he opened his mouth to introduce the woman he was marrying, the first name that came out was hers. I sat down. I picked up a napkin. I did what I had been doing at this table for 6 years. I performed the version of myself this family expected, the one who smiled and nodded and treated every slight as a misunderstanding rather than a pattern. But inside, I was counting the chairs, counting the faces, counting how many people at this table knew about the fund, the LLC, the escrow wire, and the financial future being planned in this room while I ate bread and drank wine I could barely taste. The answer was all of them. Dinner was served family style. Lorraine passed dishes around the table while making conversation that moved between wedding logistics and something else, something I had never been present for before. She referenced the fund openly, casually, as though I had always been in the room when these discussions happened. The fund will continue supporting both families going forward, she said, setting down the breadbasket. The new property, the annual expenses, all of it. We've always done this together. She was smiling at the Prescotts when she said it. She was not looking at me. How do you sit at a table where 6 people are deciding your financial future and not one of them thinks to ask whether you agree? I looked around the room. The Prescotts were nodding. Lorraine was listing future contributions, annual property maintenance, shared vacation costs, an education fund for eventual grandchildren. She said both couples twice. She said going forward 3 times. She spoke about a future that had my name on the mortgage but not on the blueprint, and every person at that table received her words as confirmation of something they had already agreed to. Nobody asked if I consented. Nobody thought they needed to. Corbin ate steadily beside me, his fork moving with the rhythm of a man who had heard this plan before and already signed off. Saoirse sat across from us with her hands folded, her eyes occasionally flicking to me and then away. The quick, careful glance of someone who knows a secret is about to surface and is calculating how close they are to the blast. The wine in my glass was untouched. The bread on my plate was torn but not eaten. The roast smelled the same as every Sunday dinner, rosemary and garlic, and the warm weight of a kitchen that had always felt like belonging. It did not feel like belonging now. It felt like a boardroom where someone had forgotten to send me the agenda. Lorraine was mid-sentence about the next annual contribution when I set my napkin on the table. I set it down the way you set down something you are never going to pick up again. I stood up. The conversation did not stop immediately. Lorraine kept talking for another half sentence. Some about January timelines, before the scrape of my chair against the tile cut through her voice. Corbin looked up. His fork was still in his hand. Saoirse looked down at her plate. The Prescotts exchanged a glance I was not meant to see but no longer cared about intercepting. I did not say a word. I walked past the extended table, past the kitchen doorway, past the hallway where family photos hung in frames that did not include me, and I opened the front door. The Mesa evening air hit my face, dry, warm, carrying the faint smell of someone's lawn sprinkler 2 houses down. Behind me, the dining room was silent for the first time all evening. I walked toward the car, and for the first time in 6 years, the silence behind me was not something I was enduring. It was something I was leaving. He caught my arm at the driveway and said my name like it was the first time he had remembered it all day. I was 3 steps from the car. Behind me, the front door of Lorraine's house was still open, light spilling onto the walkway like a stage that expected me to return to my part. Briar, stop. I'm tired. It was a slip. It didn't mean anything. I was 2 steps behind me. I kept walking. Why are you making this into a scene? Everyone is watching. I unlocked the car, then let them watch. I closed the door and pulled out past him without adjusting my mirrors. In the rear view, he was still standing in the porch light, a man watching the wrong woman leave and not yet understanding that the right one already had, years ago. I drove 26 minutes from Mesa to Scottsdale in complete silence. No radio, no phone, no rehearsal. I had spent 6 years rehearsing, and it had never once made him listen. The apartment was dark when I arrived. I sat on the couch and waited. The warm gray wall, Saoirse's color choice, caught the streetlight through the blinds. Corbin arrived 40 minutes later. He smelled faintly of his mother's roast and closed the door the way a man closes a door when he knows the conversation on the other side will not go well. He sat across from me by the window, his face half in shadow. I knew about the fund, he said. I waited. But it doesn't affect us. It's just how the families do things. That is exactly the problem, I said. You never thought anything about me was important enough to mention first. He leaned forward, hands clasped between his knees. But what came out was not an argument. It was a list. I'll leave the fund. We'll buy a different house. No connection to the LLC. I'll cancel Sedona. All of it. Just tell me what you want me to fix. His voice cracked on the word, fix. And in that sentence, I heard every unanswered birthday, every solo wedding appointment, every picture he refused to retake, offered back to me in a single desperate inventory. He was listing everything I had asked for over 6 years, the requests he had heard and decided were not worth acting on until I stood up from his mother's table and walked out. "You heard me," I said. My voice was quiet. Not angry. Worse. Certain. Every time I asked, "You heard me. You just never thought it mattered enough to act." The apartment was silent. The refrigerator hummed. "That's not," he started. "You ordered a custom necklace for her birthday 2 months early. You remembered. You planned. You chose the gold weight yourself." I held his gaze. "My birthday was 11 months ago. You forgot. You promised to make it up. You went golfing instead." He opened his mouth, and nothing came out. "You retook her photos until the light was right. You told me mine was fine. You planned weekends around her schedule. You told me you weren't spontaneous." I gripped the armrest because my hands wanted to shake, and I would not let them. "You were always capable, Corbin. You just had categories, things worth doing for her, things I would learn to accept." The worst part was not that he couldn't change. The worst part was that I believed he could, just not for me, and not until I became the woman capable of leaving. He stood up. His hands were open, palms up, the gesture of a man surrendering something he had not yet identified. "Tell me what to do," he said. "Whatever it takes." I looked at him standing in the half-light. The apartment with her paint color, and her cabinet knowledge, and her jacket hook in the closet. And I felt nothing but sadness. Not for what I was losing. For the 6 years I had spent believing the man who sat with me at urgent care was incapable of planning a birthday. He was always capable. He proved it every January in Sedona. He proved it every time he chose her with the patience and attention I spent 6 years pretending I did not need. I did not answer his question. There was nothing left to fix, because the thing that was broken was not the fund, or the house, or the name slip at dinner. It was 6 years of evidence that I had never been the person he organized his life around, and no last-minute renovation could rebuild a foundation that was never poured for me. I stood up. "I'm going to bed," I said. "We can talk about the house tomorrow." I walked past him down the hallway. He did not follow. And for the first time, his silence felt like mine. I walked into the attorney's office the next morning, carrying 6 years of evidence in a manila folder and a legal pad with 6 folder names written in my own handwriting. Corbin had not followed me to bed. I found him asleep on the couch at dawn, his phone face down on his chest, and I left without waking him. Whatever he was capable of offering now, I had already learned the answer to the only question that mattered. He had always been capable. He simply never chose me. Nadine Holt's office smelled like leather and cold air conditioning. She cleared her desk, and I spread the fund's disbursement records across the mahogany surface. 6 years of quarterly statements, each one flagged with a yellow tab on the January page. Beside them, I laid my legal pad. Sedona, 2020. Sedona, 2021. Sedona, 2022. All the way through 2025. 6 folder names from Corbin's laptop. 6 years of photographs I was never supposed to connect to the numbers on these pages. Nadine put on her reading glasses and started at the beginning. January 2020. Lodging, Sedona, 2400. January 2021. Lodging, Sedona, 2600. January 2022. She stopped reading and looked at me over the frames. "They're all the same pattern, every January for 6 years. 6 columns on a spreadsheet, 6 folders on a laptop. 6 years of my life spent believing Corbin simply did not plan ahead, while 2 families planned every January around a woman who was not me." Nadine turned the pages methodically, matching each disbursement to lodging, dining, and activity charges in Sedona during the exact weekends Corbin told me he was extending a work retreat. The payments were not coded or encrypted. They were filed under real names, real dates, real dollar amounts. Openly, precisely, the way you file something when you are not afraid of being caught. An open ledger is crueler than a hidden one. It means they never feared me enough to lie carefully. Nadine reached the final January and turned one more page. There was an additional line item I had not noticed in my own late-night scanning. A separate entry each year, categorized differently from the lodging charges. Before I tell you what that line item said, are you still with me? Because this is where the full picture locks into place. Comment your honest reaction in one word, just one, so I can see what this story is doing to you right now. A quick note. Some details ahead are adapted for narrative impact. The core truth is what matters. There's a separate reimbursement each year under a different name, Nadine said. She turned the page toward me and tapped the column with her pen. Prescott, S. Sawerse's travel expenses. Reimbursed annually. As a separate line item. Approved, filed, and paid by the same entity that had wired the down payment on the house I was supposed to call home. I stared at the page. The letters were small and clean, the same serif font as the account holder names at the top of every statement. Prescott, S. filed beside lodging charges and dining receipts and activity fees, as if her presence at those weekends was not a secret, but an operating expense. Budgeted, approved by his parents and hers. Renewed every January like a subscription. Prescott, S. Her name on a reimbursement form approved by his family, filed beside the escrow contributions that funded the house I nearly bought with my own savings tangled inside it. This was never a secret account, Nadine said. She took off her reading glasses and set them on the desk with a click. It was an open ledger that nobody thought you would ever read. I sat in the leather chair and looked at the full spread. 6 years of statements fanned across mahogany. My legal pad beside them with its blue ink folder names. The yellow flags marking every January like a calendar of things I was not invited to know. The fund had not been hidden from me. It had been placed in plain view, on a shared laptop, in a folder between the mortgage documents and the wedding planning spreadsheet, because the system was built on the assumption that I would never look. That I would keep filing every disappointment under a label. That I would keep saying, "That's just Corbin," until the phrase became permanent. Nadine closed the last folder and looked at me. "Your escrow withdrawal confirmation came through this morning," she said. "Your $72,000 is safe." I exhaled. The first full exhale in weeks. The kind that loosens something behind your ribs you did not know was clenched. "There's one more thing," she said. "The brokerage needs your signature on the formal release by end of day. Once you sign, it's done. The house, the fund connection, all of it." She slid the release form across the desk. Heavy bond paper, crisp at the edges, printed with the kind of legal language that turns a life decision into 3 signature lines and a notary stamp. The same kind of form I had imagined signing on the day I found the shoes, back when I thought signing for a house would be the beginning of something. Now it was the end. I picked up the form. I did not sign it yet. I held it in my hands and felt its weight. Lighter than the manila folder, lighter than 6 years of evidence, but heavier than anything else I would carry out of this office. The brokerage closed at 5. I had 4 hours. 21 days earlier, I had found a pair of shoes in my closet and started asking questions. Now I was driving to the brokerage with the release form on the passenger seat, about to sign away the house those questions had dismantled. The receipt from Nadine's office sat beside it. Confirmation that my savings were extracted and safe. The afternoon sun hit the windshield, and I drove with both hands on the wheel. Steady, unhurried. The way you drive when you know exactly where you are going and exactly what it will cost. The brokerage was in a low stucco building off Scottsdale Road. Inside it smelled like artificial lavender and new carpet. Framed property listings lined the walls. Happy kitchens, green lawns, families standing in doorways of houses that promised them futures. I had been one of those families 3 weeks ago. I sat down across a glass desk from the broker, a man in his 50s with a firm handshake and a pen he clicked twice before setting it between us. He reviewed the form. He read slowly, turning each page with the care of someone who knew what this document meant and wanted to make sure I did too. If you walk away now, you may forfeit a portion of the earnest money, he said. Are you sure you don't want to wait until Mr. Mercer can be present? Don't you want to wait for Mr. Mercer? The same question I had been asked in different forms for 6 years. At the bank, at the dinner table, in every room where a decision was being made about my life. Don't you want to check with Corbin first? Don't you want to run it by him? As if my presence in the chair, my name on the paperwork, and my money in the escrow were not sufficient evidence that I was a person capable of making my own choices. This is the moment I told you about at the very beginning. The brokerage office, the release form, the broker asking if I was sure. Now you know what it took to sit in that chair. I've been sure since before I walked in here, I said. I took the pen. My hand did not shake. It had shaken in Nadine's office the first time she offered me a pen, weeks ago, when the scope of the fund was still unfolding, and I was not yet certain I had the right to act alone. It did not shake now. I had earned this steadiness. I had built it out of late-night spreadsheets and a borrowed notebook, and the quiet courage of a woman named Tamara, who kept a business card for 4 years because she believed someone would need it. I signed on 3 lines, my name in black ink on white bond paper, the same name I had carried through every room of this story, the name Corbin could not remember at his mother's dinner table, the name that would now appear on a cancellation notice sent to every party connected to the escrow. Signing felt like setting down a suitcase I had been carrying through every room of a house that was never mine, and finally hearing the weight hit the floor. The broker collected the pages, squared them against the desk, and placed them in a folder. All parties connected to the escrow will receive notification within 24 hours, he said. He said it like a warning. I heard it like a countdown, 24 hours. That was how long I had before Corbin, his mother, and the Prescotts learned that the woman they forgot to consult had just removed herself from their architecture. Is there anything else you need from me? I asked. No, ma'am. You're free to go. Free to go. Such a small phrase for such a large door. He handed me the receipt, a single page confirming the release had been filed, dated, and entered into the system. I folded it once and placed it in my bag beside the manila folder that held 6 years of evidence I had assembled in 3 weeks. The bag was heavier now than it had been when I walked in, but I was lighter. I walked out of the brokerage into the late Arizona afternoon. The heat hit my face the way Arizona heat always does. Dry, immediate, honest. The parking lot was half empty. My car sat in the second row, baking in the sun, and when I opened the door, the steering wheel was almost too warm to touch. I sat in the driver's seat with the engine off and the receipt on the passenger seat where the release form had been. The house was gone. The fund connection was severed. My savings were safe. Through the windshield, the Scottsdale skyline looked the same as it always had. Low buildings, brown mountains, a sky so blue it almost hurt. But I was seeing it from the other side of something now. The side where I had signed my own name on my own terms for my own reasons, and nobody had needed to be consulted first. In 24 hours, every person who had built that system would know I had found it, traced it, and walked away from it. Corbin, Lorraine, the Prescotts. They would open a notification and read my name on a cancellation form and understand, for the first time, that I had been paying attention all along. I had 1 night left in the apartment before those notifications went out. 1 night to pack everything I intended to keep, and to leave behind everything I no longer needed to carry. The suitcase I pulled from the hall closet still had a baggage tag from our Sedona trip, the weekend Corbin first said the word forever. I tore the tag off, dropped it in the trash, and set the suitcase on the bed. The notification countdown was already running. I had 1 evening to take what was mine and leave behind everything that wasn't. I started in the bedroom. Clothes first. Only what fit in 2 suitcases, nothing that required negotiation. My teaching files went into a box. My grandmother's quilt, folded tight, went on top. I moved through the closet with the efficiency of a woman who had spent 3 weeks learning exactly what she was willing to lose, and when I opened Corbin's nightstand drawer to check for anything of mine, I found a set of keys I had never seen before. 2 brass keys on a plain ring, unlabeled, tucked beneath a phone charger. I turned them over. One was stamped with a locksmith's code. The other had a small sticker on the back. PM Holdings, Suite 4. Keys to the Prescott Mercer office. He had always had direct access to the trust infrastructure. He had kept them in his nightstand, 12 inches from where I slept every night, and never mentioned them. I put the keys back. They were not mine to take. They were his to explain. How do you divide a life that was never equally built? You don't divide it. You extract what you brought in and you walk away from the rest. I kept my books, my work laptop, my jewelry box. The one my mother gave me at 21, not the one Corbin bought at a mall kiosk for Christmas 2 years ago. I left the kitchen things. I left the framed photos. I left the throw blanket on the couch, the one Saoirse had folded during one of her visits, the one that matched nothing else in the room because it was never chosen for me. The apartment grew emptier in stages, not dramatically. I was not clearing walls or stripping shelves. I was removing myself from the margins of a space that had never quite centered around me. When I finished, the rooms looked almost the same. A guest walking in would not have noticed anything missing. That, I realized, was the point. I had lived here for 4 years, and my absence barely changed the shape of the room. I carried the suitcases and the box to the covered parking below. The garage echoed with each trip. Footsteps, the rolling wheels of the suitcase, the trunk closing. Ordinary sounds made strange by what they meant. Then I went back upstairs for the last thing. The dining table was clear. I had wiped it down that morning out of habit, the way I wiped it every morning, and now I set out the documents in a precise row. Photocopies of the fund statements, the cancellation paperwork from the escrow company, the brokerage release receipt from that afternoon. Each page aligned with the next, the way Nadine would have arranged them. Evidence presented in sequence, telling a story that required no narration. I slid the engagement ring off my finger. The metal was cool and familiar, and my hand felt lighter without it in a way that was not relief and not grief, but something between. The strange emptiness of removing something you wore so long, it became part of your skin. The ring caught the kitchen light and threw a single line across the wall, a bright crack in something that had already broken. I set it on top of the stack. Then I took an index card from the junk drawer and wrote 7 words in my own handwriting. No explanation, no accusation. The documents would do the explaining. The note only needed to carry the weight of 1 sentence. You always said there'd be a next year. There isn't one now. I placed the card beside the ring and stepped back. The table looked like a closing argument. Evidence, exhibit, and verdict, laid out for a jury of 1. I walked through the apartment one last time. I ran my hand along the kitchen counter where I had set the shoes that first morning. I touched the hallway wall where Saoirse's warm gray paint caught the last light through the blinds. I passed the closet where the keys still sat in the nightstand and the hook where her jacket had hung. Every surface held a memory I was choosing not to carry. Corbin's cologne lingered on a jacket draped over the bedroom chair. I left it there. The smell would fade. Everything would fade. I hung the apartment key on its hook beside the door. I picked up my bag. My mouth was dry. I had not had water since morning, and the metallic taste of adrenaline sat on my tongue like a coin. I didn't cry. I thought I would. I didn't. I pulled the door shut and held the handle until the deadbolt caught. The lock clicked the way it always did. The difference was on my side of the door. In the parking garage, I loaded the last bag and checked my phone. A text from Tamara, sent 4 minutes ago. Mom called. She knows about the release. She's calling Corbin tonight. I pulled out of the garage with 2 suitcases, 1 box, and Tamara's message glowing on the screen. Sawersi knew. By morning, every person connected to the fund would know the house deal was dead, and the woman who uncovered it all had walked out with nothing but the savings she came in with. The only question was whether Corbin would hear it from his mother first, or find it on the dining table. Gate B7 smelled like burned coffee and carpet cleaner, and I was counting the ceiling tiles when his name lit up my phone for the 4th time in 6 minutes. I had driven straight from the apartment to Sky Harbor, bought a one-way ticket to Denver at the counter, and walked to the gate with 2 suitcases and a box that held everything I was willing to carry into the next version of my life. Corbin had found the apartment. Whether he found the dining table first or heard it from Sayersha, I did not yet know, but the calls told me he knew I was gone. The first 3 I let ring. I watched his name pulse on the screen while travelers shuffled past with rolling bags and neck pillows, and I felt the phone vibrate against my thigh like a heartbeat from a life I had already left. He called the way he did everything, persistently, urgently, as if repetition could substitute for the attention he had never paid when it mattered. On the 4th call, I picked up. Not because I owed him an answer, because I wanted to hear whether he led with the ring or the documents. Where are you? The apartment? Everything is... Where are you? The apartment. He led with the empty rooms. Not the evidence, not the ring, not the note. He noticed my absence before he noticed the proof, confirming what I had suspected since the day he introduced me by someone else's name. He saw me as furniture first and a person second, and when the furniture moved, the room felt wrong before the reason did. You want to know the strangest part? He sounded surprised. 6 years, and my leaving was the first thing I had done that he hadn't planned for. I can explain the fund, he said. His breathing was ragged. I can explain everything. Just tell me where you are, and I'll come to you. You don't need to explain the fund, Corbin. I've already read it. Silence. The airport noise filled the gap. A boarding call for a different gate. The hiss of the coffee kiosk. A child laughing somewhere near the windows. It wasn't jealousy, I said. It was finding out that your entire family had a plan for my life, and nobody thought I needed to be in the room when they made it. That's not... I was trying to protect you from... From what? From knowing? His voice kept reaching for me through the phone, like a hand trying to close around water. He cycled through the stages I had watched him cycle through at the dinner table and in the driveway. Confusion, then deflection, then something that sounded like honesty but arrived too late to be useful. I should have told you, he said. I know that now. You knew it then. You just decided it wasn't worth the conversation. That's not fair. You're right. None of this was fair. That's the point. The terminal hummed around me. I held the phone against my ear and watched a woman across the gate adjust her daughter's backpack straps. A small, automatic gesture of care that required no negotiation, no request, no 6-year waiting period. I looked away. I'll pull out of the fund, Corbin said. His voice cracked. I'll tell my mother everything. I'll confront Sayersha. We can buy a different house. No LLC, no trust, nothing connected to any of it. Just tell me where you are. I was listing every concession I had ever wanted, every trip I suggested, every birthday he forgot, every photo he refused to retake. He was offering it all back to me in a single desperate breath, as if the problem were a checklist and the solution were compliance. But the problem was never the list. The problem was that I had to threaten to leave before the list existed. I don't want to be the woman you had to lose before you learned how to love her, I said. The line went quiet. Not the measured silence he used when calculating his next sentence. A different silence. The silence of a man hearing something he cannot argue with because it is true. Now boarding rows 15 through 30 for flight 724 to Denver, the gate agent announced. I stood up. The boarding pass was between my fingers, its edges sharp and clean. My mouth was dry. The metallic taste of adrenaline had been on my tongue since the parking garage, and the stale water I had bought from a fountain kiosk had done nothing to wash it away. Briar, please. The gate agent called my row. I stood up. He was still talking when I hung up. I handed my boarding pass to the agent and walked down the jetway without turning around. The phone buzzed twice more in my hand. 2 more calls I would never answer, before I switched it to airplane mode. The jetway smelled like jet fuel and recycled air, and my suitcase wheels clicked against the metal floor in a rhythm that sounded like counting down from something. Somewhere behind me in Scottsdale, Corbin was standing in an apartment that still smelled like my shampoo. He was holding a ring that no longer meant what he thought it did. And on the dining table, beneath the kitchen light, I had turned on one last time before locking the door, was a note he would need to read 3 times before he understood it was not an accusation. It was a summary. I found my seat, buckled in, and watched Phoenix shrink beneath the wing until the lights became a grid, and the grid became a glow, and the glow became nothing I needed to look at anymore. Why would Saoirse Prescott, the woman who ran every family gathering like a board session, whose name sat on the fund's reimbursement lines and the lodge's sponsor banners, leave me a voicemail that started with the words, "I owe you an honesty"? I was somewhere over the New Mexico border when I toggled airplane mode off. I wanted to check for a message from Tamara. Instead, I found a single voicemail notification from a number I had never seen call my phone directly. Saoirse. Time-stamped 11 minutes after I hung up on Corbin. 6 years of knowing this woman, and she had never once contacted me without going through him first. Every dinner invitation, every wedding opinion, every piece of information, all of it routed through Corbin, as if I were a department she managed through a liaison. Now, for the first time, she had called me directly. I put in my earbuds, pressed the overhead reading light, and hit play. Her voice was controlled, not cold, measured, the way someone speaks when they have rehearsed something important and want to get through it before their composure fails. "I owe you an honesty," she began. "I should have given it years ago, and I didn't, and that is something I will carry. But you deserve to hear this before anyone else rewrites it for you. Have you ever learned something that didn't add new information? It just rearranged everything you already knew? The fund wasn't Corbin's idea," she said. "It wasn't even mine originally. It was the solution we inherited from the last time someone in this family asked the wrong questions." The cabin hummed around me, the engine drone, the white noise of recycled air. 2 rows up, the drink cart clinked faintly, and the smell of reheated coffee drifted back. I pressed the earbud tighter into my ear. I told myself every year that it would be different with you, that Corbin would handle it better than his father did, that he would tell you about the fund on his own, bring you into the conversation, treat you like a partner instead of a variable. She paused. He didn't, and every year I stayed quiet. I made the same choice his parents made before him. His father. She said his father did something. She said the last time. Not once before. The last time. The phrasing of a woman describing a pattern, not an incident. I gripped the armrest. My phone screen was warm against my palm. The voicemail timer ticking forward. 142, 143. And each second added another layer to a story I thought I had already understood completely. The fund was restructured 11 years ago, Saoirse continued. After a woman who was involved with Corbin's older cousin discovered the same arrangement you found. She asked the same questions. She traced the same money. And when she threatened to go public, the families offered her a settlement and an NDA. She took both. The fund was reorganized afterward. New entity name, new filing structure, same purpose. Prescott Mercer Holdings was built on the assumption that the next woman who asked questions would also take the check. The fund wasn't a wall. It was a revolving door, and I was just the latest woman to walk through it. I sat in my seat with the reading light casting a cone on my lap, and the New Mexico desert invisible below me in the dark. And I felt the ground shift underneath a story I had spent 3 weeks building. I thought I had uncovered a personal betrayal, a fiancé who hid a fund, and a family who enabled him. But this was not personal. This was institutional. The system was older than my relationship. It was designed to process women like me. Women who asked, who noticed, who traced the money to its source, and convert them into silence through settlement. Saoirse's voice came back. I'm not calling to apologize. I'm calling because you deserve to know the size of what you walked away from. Every woman before you signed. Every one of them took the payment and the non-disclosure and disappeared from the family's records like they had never existed. Other women. There had been other women, and every single one of them had taken the check. You're not the first to leave, Saoirse said. Her voice dropped to something quieter, not emotional, but close. The edge of something she had held back for a long time. You're the first to leave evidence. The voicemail ended. The timer froze at 3:47. I played it again. Then a third time. The words did not change. The cabin did not change. The hum of the engine and the faint coffee smell and the reading light on my lap. None of it changed. But I was different. I was not the one who boarded this plane. That woman thought she was escaping a bad engagement. The woman sitting in seat 14C now understood she had walked out of a generational machine designed to make leaving quiet and staying profitable. Below me, the lights of a small town slid past the window like a story I would never know the middle of. Saoirse had not called to warn me or apologize. She called because for the first time in the fund's history, someone had left the paperwork on the dining table instead of signing a non-disclosure agreement. And she wanted me to understand what that meant, not just for me, but for every woman who came before me and chose the silence instead. I turned the phone face down on my lap. The plane hummed. Denver was 40 minutes away, and the story I thought I had finished telling myself was only now beginning to show its actual shape. 3 minutes and 47 seconds. That is how long it takes to turn a personal betrayal into a family institution. I replayed the voicemail a fourth time, somewhere over the Arizona-New Mexico border, pressing the earbud deeper, as if proximity could squeeze more meaning from words that had already rearranged everything I thought I understood. Saoirse said, the last time. Not once before. Last time implies a first time and a middle. A sequence. I started counting. Corbin's cousin. The woman before her. How many others had sat exactly where I was sitting, mid-air, mid-exit, and been offered a check instead of the truth? The voicemail was not a confession. It was a strategic acknowledgement. Saoirse had called because my documents on the dining table had made the family's usual playbook, payout, NDA, disappearance, impossible for the first time. I had not taken the check. I had left the receipt. And that single difference had broken a pattern old enough to have its own filing structure. I had been solving this like it was my problem. It was older than me, older than Corbin. The fund was not a mistake. It was a protocol. And the documents I left on the table were not just for one man to read. They were a record that could not be shredded, denied, or settled away. How many of them had folded the check into a drawer and told themselves it was easier this way? The landing gear dropped. The cabin lights came on. Denver appeared below in a grid of amber and white, and I pressed my forehead against the cold window and watched a city I had not lived in since college grow larger beneath the wing. The recycled air gave way to the faint smell of hydraulic fluid as we descended, and when the wheels touched the runway, I felt the jolt run through my seat like the physical punctuation of a sentence I had been writing for 3 weeks. I walked through the Denver terminal on autopilot, following signs, pulling my suitcase, moving through the bright fluorescent corridors that felt too clean and too still after the dark cabin. At baggage claim, I stopped beside the carousel and called my parents. Eugene picked up on the first ring. "I'm here," I said. "I'm in Denver. I need to tell you something else." I told him about the voicemail. About the fund being restructured after a previous woman discovered the same arrangement. About the NDAs and the payouts and the revolving door that had been spinning long before I ever met Corbin. Ruth was on the extension. I could hear her breathing, the particular quiet of a mother listening to her daughter describe a system designed to erase women like her. There is a specific kind of silence a parent gives you when they are not surprised by what you are telling them, just angry they could not stop it. Ruth spoke first. "You come home first," she said. Her voice was steady, but close to the edge of something. "Everything else can wait until morning." "Did you keep copies of the fund statements?" Eugene asked. His tone had shifted, no longer the gentle voice from our dawn call, but the flat, structural voice of a man who had spent 30 years inspecting things built to hold weight. "All of them?" "Every page." "Good. I know a trust litigation attorney in Denver, Howard Lacey. Worked with him on the Greenfield project years ago. Solid. I'll call him first thing tomorrow." He said it the way he said everything important, without decoration, without emotion, as if the solution were a load-bearing beam he was sliding into place. My solo flight from Arizona had just become a family-backed legal position overnight. I collected my bags and walked through the terminal toward arrivals. The Denver night air hit my face when the automatic doors opened. Thin, cold, edged with pine. Nothing like the dry heat I had left behind. I stopped on the curb and looked down the pickup lane. They were already there. Eugene stood beside the car with one hand raised, the same wave he had used since I was a kid. No urgency, no rushing forward. Just one hand up, steady, like he had been standing there the whole time waiting for me to come home. Ruth was beside him. She did not wave. She watched me walk toward them with an expression that held everything she had not said on the phone. The fear and the relief and the fury compressed into the tight line of a mother who had just learned exactly how much her daughter had been carrying alone. "You look like you haven't eaten since Tuesday," Eugene said when I reached them. "It's been a long Tuesday," I said. I took my suitcase. Ruth pulled me into her arms and held me against her shoulder, and the carry-on strap cut into my palm, and the salt from tears I had not wiped sat on my lips, and I laughed. I laughed and cried at the same time, standing on a curb at Denver International Airport in the cold night air. Because for the first time in weeks, the weight was not mine alone. "You're here," Ruth said. "That's the only thing that matters tonight." I fell asleep in my childhood bedroom for the first time in 4 years, with copies of the fund statements in my carry-on and Howard Lacey's name on my father's notepad downstairs. In the morning, I would learn that Saoirse's voicemail was not the only call she made that night, and that the conversation she had with Corbin after mine lasted considerably longer. I found his sweatshirt folded in the third box I opened, the gray one with the torn collar, the one he wore on Saturday mornings in a life I'd already locked the door on. I learned later that Saoirse's call to Corbin that night had lasted over an hour. Whatever she told him, he didn't call me. Not that week, not the next. By early May, I'd signed a lease on a studio apartment in Denver and started unpacking alone. The apartment smelled like fresh paint and cardboard. The radiator clicked in uneven rhythms, and traffic hummed below the second-floor window like a pulse I hadn't learned yet. I worked through the boxes methodically. Kitchen first, then bathroom, then the bedroom shelf I'd need for school binders. I was efficient. I was organized. I was doing fine until the sweatshirt. It was folded between 2 winter coats, and when I lifted it, the collar brushed my wrist, and I caught his cologne. Faint, almost gone, but enough. Enough to remember the Sunday mornings when he'd wear it to make coffee, when I'd press my face against his shoulder and believe that the life we were building was real. The worst part wasn't the betrayal. The worst part was that the good years had been genuine. He had loved me in that sweatshirt. He had also been part of a system that was stealing from me while he did. The love and the deception had lived in the same house, eaten at the same table, slept in the same bed, and I had never once felt them as separate things. I carried the sweatshirt into the bathroom and sat on the tile floor. The cold bit through my jeans. I pressed the fabric against my face and cried. Not the controlled, quiet tears I'd managed at the airport, but the kind that bend you forward and steal your breath. I cried for the version of Corbin I'd believed in, for the years I'd organized around a marriage that had been organized around me. I gave myself 10 minutes on that bathroom floor. Then I stood up, folded the sweatshirt into a donation bag, and finished the kitchen boxes. The grief wasn't about what I'd lost. It was about what had never actually existed. You don't get to skip the part where you miss them. The missing is the price of having meant it. By mid-May, I'd started my new teaching position at a middle school 12 blocks from the apartment. I walked a route that passed a bakery and a used bookstore. I bought my own dishes, a set of 4, white with a thin blue rim, still smooth and unchipped. I cooked dinner alone, pasta with olive oil and whatever vegetables looked fresh at the corner market. I ate at a table for one, and nobody asked me where I'd been. Nobody needed a reason for how I spent my evening. Nobody tracked the mileage on a car I didn't share. The loneliness was real. I won't pretend it wasn't. Some nights I sat on the couch after grading papers, and the silence pressed against the walls like something physical. But the absence of performance was real too. I didn't have to smile at a dinner table where the math had already been done against me. I didn't have to thank anyone for a life that had been funded with my own redirected money. Freedom tasted like a meal I cooked for one. Simple, hot, exactly what I wanted. Building a life alone felt like learning to write with my other hand. Clumsy, slow, but unmistakably mine. In late May, the laptop glowed on my thighs while I sat cross-legged on the couch. Howard Lacey appeared on screen, a sharp-eyed, silver-haired trust litigation attorney in his early 60s, connected to me through my father Eugene's professional network in Denver. He'd taken my case pro bono after reviewing the fund documentation I'd brought from Scottsdale. "Your withdrawal is finalized," Howard said, adjusting his glasses. "The trust has no remaining claims on your assets or your name. Every account is clean. You're out." I exhaled. The word sounded simple. Out. But it carried the weight of months. The escrow account, the fund statements, the confrontation at the family meeting, the house release I'd signed at the brokerage. All of it distilled into a single legal confirmation spoken through laptop speakers while Denver traffic murmured below my window. "There's one more thing," Howard said. His tone shifted. Careful, deliberate, the way attorneys speak when they're about to change the shape of a conversation. "A woman contacted my office last week. She was connected to the Mercer family about 8 years ago. She saw the documentation trail you created and wants to know if her NDA is still enforceable." 8 years ago. There had been someone 8 years ago. And she was still bound by paper. I stared at the screen. Howard waited. The radiator clicked. "How did she find the documents?" I asked. "She didn't say specifically, but the trail you left, the fund records, the withdrawal filings, those created a pattern that someone with prior experience would recognize. She's in Arizona. She wants to know if what you did changes anything for her." I left evidence on a dining table for one man. It reached someone I'd never met. I closed the laptop after Howard's call and sat at my kitchen table. My table, in my apartment, bought with my money. Somewhere in Arizona, a woman I had never met was holding a copy of the same fund documents I'd left on a dining table for Corbin, and she was using them to ask whether the silence she'd been paid for could finally be undone. I hadn't set out to build a case, but the case was building itself. Tamara called on a Wednesday afternoon while I was grading papers, and the first thing she said was, "Corbin went to Mesa. He went to your mother-in-law's house, and he didn't leave for 3 hours. I set my red pen down mid-mark. The apartment was quiet, except for Denver traffic through the cracked window and Tamara's breathing on the other end of the line. I hadn't told her yet about Howard's news. The woman in Arizona, the NDA, the documentation trail reaching someone I'd never met. That could wait. This couldn't. "When?" I asked. "Sunday," Tamara said. Delia, Lorraine's neighbor, told me yesterday. She drove over to drop off groceries and heard him from the front porch. She said she could hear him from the driveway, Briar. She's never heard Corbin raise his voice, not once in 30 years of knowing him. I clicked my pen cap between my fingers. Corbin, who had deflected every confrontation I'd ever brought to him. Corbin, who had responded to evidence of systematic theft with the phrase, "Let me look into it." Corbin, who had watched me walk through an airport terminal and chosen silence over pursuit. That Corbin had driven to his mother's house and shouted loud enough for his uncle to hear from the driveway. Whatever Saoirse had told him during that hour-long call had broken something that my leaving alone could not. "What did Lorraine say?" I asked. "That's the part you need to hear," Tamara said, and her voice dropped low the way it does when she's about to deliver something she's already turned over in her own mind. "How do you hold someone accountable for a wrong they genuinely believed was ordinary?" Tamara told me what Delia had overheard. Corbin had demanded to know why Lorraine never questioned who controlled the fund, why she never asked about the women who came before, the ones Saoirse had managed out of the family with paperwork and payments. Why she had watched her own son's wife get folded into the same arrangement and said nothing. Lorraine's answer was not a denial. It was not an apology. It was not even a defense. "I thought that was just how our family worked," Tamara said, quoting what Delia had relayed. "Saoirse handled the money. I handled the house. Nobody questioned it." I took a sip of coffee that had gone cold and bitter hours ago. The metallic taste sat on my tongue. "She wasn't defending it, Briar," Tamara continued. "She was describing it like someone describing weather. Like someone telling you the sky is blue and not understanding why you're upset about it." I bit the inside of my cheek and stared at the stack of student essays on my kitchen table. Lorraine Mercer had not been cruel to me. She had served me pot roast at Sunday dinners and asked about my classroom and complimented the curtains I chose for the guest bedroom. She had done all of this while her sister-in-law operated a fund that siphoned money from my marriage, and Lorraine had genuinely, completely, believed that arrangement was the natural order of things. Not because she was stupid, because she had never been shown an alternative. The Mercer family didn't build a conspiracy. They built a house where every room had its own thermostat and nobody ever checked the furnace. Tamara and I talked for another 20 minutes. She told me Delia had left the groceries on the porch and driven away without going inside. She told me Corbin had sat in his car in Lorraine's driveway for a long time after the confrontation, and that Delia had circled the block once and seen him with his forehead against the steering wheel. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet apartment and let it settle. The evening air drifted through the window, carrying the faint smell of rain on asphalt. I washed my coffee mug. I stacked the essays. I did the small mechanical things that keep a person anchored when understanding tries to pull you somewhere vast. Saoirse had built the machine. Lorraine had oiled it without knowing what it was. Corbin had inherited the keys and never checked what they opened. And I had lived inside it for years, furnishing rooms that were never truly mine, believing the temperature was set for my comfort when it had always been set for someone else's. I kept looking for the person who decided to hurt me. There wasn't one. There was a system that made hurting me efficient, and it ran on silence and habit and the particular kind of loyalty that never asks what it's loyal to. That was worse than a defense. A defense you can argue with. A worldview just sits there. The scariest systems aren't the ones run by people who know they're doing wrong. They're the ones run by people who never thought to ask. And Corbin, for the first time, was standing inside that system and seeing the walls. Whether he would try to tear them down or learn to live within them was something I could not control. I had built my own walls now, in a studio apartment in Denver, and they were thin and bare and entirely mine. I was washing the single plate from my dinner when my phone lit up on the counter. Not Tamara. Not my parents. Corbin's name, for the first time since the airport. But this time, it wasn't a call. It was a text, 4 words long, and it didn't ask me to come back. 4 words. No punctuation, no question mark, no request. And they landed heavier than the 3-hour airport call ever did. You were right. Everything. I read them standing at the kitchen sink with water still running over the plate, and I read them again after I turned the faucet off, and I read them a third time sitting at the table with my hands flat on the wood. I didn't reply. I set the phone face down and finished grading papers. The longer message arrived at 2 in the morning. I found it when I woke at 6, the screen bright with a block of text that scrolled past the preview window. I sat up in bed with the sheets pooled around my waist and read every word. I pulled out of the fund, he wrote. I told my mother what it cost. I canceled Sedona. I'm seeing someone, a therapist, not a woman. I need you to know I heard you. He listed everything like evidence. The withdrawal paperwork, the conversation with Lorraine that I already knew about from Tamara, a weekly appointment with a counselor whose office was in Tempe. He described each change the way a man describes renovations to a house he's trying to sell. Thorough, specific, hoping the inventory alone would be enough. The last line was the one that stopped me. Is there still a version of this where you come home? I did everything I'd asked for. And it broke my heart that he could only do it after I was gone. Have you ever gotten exactly what you asked for, years after you stopped being the person who needed it? I got dressed. I drove to school. I taught 3 classes on persuasive essay structure and helped a 7th grader find a thesis statement in a paragraph about her grandmother's garden. I ate lunch in the faculty room and talked about nothing important with people who didn't know my last name, used to be hyphenated. The day moved forward the way days do when you let them carry you instead of fighting the current. I came home at 4:15 and made chamomile tea and sat at the kitchen table and read his message again. The tea cooled while I stared at the screen. The changes were real. I knew that in my bones. Corbin was not performing. He was not recycling the language of accountability the way he'd recycled promises during our marriage. He had actually walked into his mother's house and raised his voice. He had actually sat in a therapist's office and said the words out loud. He had actually withdrawn from the fund that his family had treated like furniture. Always there, never questioned. The man who wrote that message was the man I'd spent 6 years waiting for. And that was exactly the problem. His message was a bridge built perfectly to a shore I'd already left. Growth that only happens after loss isn't always damage control. Sometimes it's real. Sometimes the person genuinely changes. But the woman they changed for has already become someone else too. And the math doesn't work anymore because both variables moved. He became the partner I'd needed. I became the woman who no longer needed a partner to prove she deserved honesty. It wasn't fake. That was the cruelest part. He meant every word. And I was going to say no to every word and mean it just as much. I set the tea aside. I picked up the phone. I typed slowly, choosing each word the way I'd choose a nail to hang something permanent. I believe you changed. I forgive you. But forgiveness is not a door that reopens. I hope you keep becoming the man you described for whoever comes next. I read it back once. My thumb hovered over the screen. The apartment was silent except for the radiator and the distant sound of a bus shifting gears on the street below. I swallowed. Clean, dry, the taste of nothing, and pressed send. Forgiveness doesn't mean you go back. It means you stop carrying them forward. I didn't want the last word. I wanted the last feeling to be mine. And the feeling was not anger, not triumph, not even sadness. It was the particular relief of setting something down that you've held so long, your hand forgot it was gripping. I washed my mug. I brushed my teeth. I pulled back the fresh sheets on a bed I'd made myself that morning and lay down with the pillow cool against my cheek. I picked up the phone one final time, held the power button until the screen went black, and set it face down on the nightstand. The room went quiet. The Denver dark settled against the window like a hand pressing gently on a closed door. And for the first time since March, sleep came without negotiation. No replaying conversations. No rehearsing what I should have said. No lying awake, calculating what was taken and what remained. Just the sound of my own breathing in a room that belonged to me, in a life that was small and bare and beginning. I woke at 6:14 to a Denver sunrise I hadn't earned but was going to keep. My phone was still off on the nightstand. Somewhere in Scottsdale, Corbin had read my message. I was sure of that. And somewhere in Mesa, Lorraine was sitting in a kitchen that had always been hers, wondering if the word she'd built her life around had a different definition than the one she'd lived inside for 40 years. When was the last time someone asked me to do something fun, and I didn't check with anyone before saying yes? 3 weeks had passed since I turned off my phone and slept through the night. I'd turned it back on the next morning to find no reply from Corbin. Just the quiet confirmation that my message had been read at 3:47 a.m. I didn't need a response. The silence was its own answer, and it was the right one. On a Thursday in early June, a colleague named Meg stood in the doorway of my classroom holding a trail map and said her hiking group had a spot open for Saturday. Rocky Mountain National Park. Early start, good weather, back by dinner. I said yes before my mouth finished the word. No pause. No checking a shared calendar. No texting to ask if the timing worked for someone else. No weighing whether my absence would cause a question I'd have to answer later. Just, yes. 6 years of checking, and the first real freedom felt like a one-syllable word. I drove up with Meg and 2 other teachers on Saturday morning. The trailhead smelled like pine and cold granite, and the altitude thinned the air enough that I had to slow my breathing on the switchbacks. I hadn't hiked since before the marriage. My legs burned and my lungs protested, and I loved every minute of it because the discomfort belonged to me. I'd chosen it, carried it, earned it. At the overlook, the mountains opened up like a sentence you've been waiting to finish. Snow still capped the far peaks. The wind pulled at my hair and pressed my jacket flat against my ribs. Meg took out her phone and snapped a photo of me against the railing. She looked at the screen, frowned, and shook her head. "Hold on. The light's wrong on this one," she said. "Let me retake it. You deserve a good one." Has anyone ever done something so small for you that it made you realize how large the absence had been? Corbin took hundreds of photos of me over 6 years. At dinners, at holidays, at the Sedona Overlook where the tradition lived. He never once checked if the light was right. He never looked at the screen and thought the woman in the frame deserved a second try. Not because he was cruel, because it never occurred to him to look closely enough to notice. Meg held up the phone again. "Turn your chin a little. There. Perfect." The shutter clicked. She showed me the screen. I was squinting slightly into the sun, my hair blown sideways, my jacket wrinkled from the climb. I was smiling. Not a posed smile, not the careful arrangement I'd worn at family dinners and brokerage appointments. A real one, caught by someone who cared enough to take the shot twice. It was such a small thing. It was everything. We drove back in the late afternoon with trail mix still on my tongue and cold water from a metal bottle settling in my stomach. The other teachers talked about summer plans. I listened and said a few things, and mostly watched the foothills flatten into the Denver skyline through the passenger window. That evening, I stood on my balcony with the phone in my hand, the retaken photo still glowing on the screen. The city was settling into a Saturday night, traffic thinning, restaurant patios filling, the sky turning the color of peach skin above the rooftops. The air tasted like the start of summer, green and clean, carrying something that might have been honeysuckle from the courtyard below. The brokerage parking lot and the mountain overlook were the same woman at 2 ends of a sentence she'd spent 3 months writing. I thought about March. The leather chair in the signing room. The pen that felt heavier than it should have. The moment I wrote my name on the release and walked out into a parking lot that was too bright and too quiet and too final. I had believed in that moment that I was giving something up. The house, the fund, the future that had been promised to me every year when Corbin said the words I'd built my calendar around. I was wrong. I hadn't been giving something up. I'd been keeping something for the first time. Myself. The version of me that existed before the shared accounts, and the Sunday dinners, and the careful performance of a woman who believed she was loved the way she deserved. There would be a next year. For the first time, it belonged entirely to me. I leaned on the balcony railing, the metal cool under my forearms, and looked at the photo one more time. A woman on a mountain, lit correctly, smiling because someone thought she was worth a second try. Below me, Denver hummed its Saturday night frequency, not asking my permission to be beautiful, not requiring my attendance, just being alive the way cities are when you finally stop performing for them. I had signed a release form in a brokerage office and walked out thinking I'd lost the only future I'd ever been promised. But the woman who signed that paper and the woman on this balcony were the same person, separated by 3 months and a truth that should have broken her, but didn't. The woman in the photo was smiling because someone cared enough to retake it. The woman on the balcony was smiling because she finally cared enough to stay. I spent 6 years believing that loyalty meant silence. I told myself the discomfort was normal, that the family I married into simply did things differently, that asking questions would make me ungrateful. Don't make my mistake. When the math doesn't add up in your life, financially, emotionally, or otherwise, trust what you see, not what you're told to feel. The answers are usually sitting right there, waiting for you to stop looking away. This wasn't a revenge story in the way you might expect. I didn't set out to tear anyone down. I set out to understand what had been done to me, and when I did, I chose to leave instead of fight. But here's what I learned. Sometimes walking away is the most powerful revenge story there is. Sometimes, the people who wronged you don't need your anger. They need your absence, because your absence is the one thing their system can't absorb. The hardest part of any revenge story isn't the confrontation. It's the quiet morning after, when you wake up alone and realize you're not missing anything. You're just finally free. If this story moved you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment and tell me. Would you have handled it the same way? Or would you have done something differently? If you know someone who needs to hear this message today, please share this with them. And if you haven't already, subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more to me than you know. Some details in the story were fictionalized for storytelling purposes, and